Last week, we brought to a close our brief discussion of the 5 cardinal virtues, Sadharana Dharmas of Hinduism: purity, self-control, detachment, truth, and non-injury. Just for the sake of recapitulation, the first 3, purity, self-control, and detachment, these are called individual virtues. And the last 2, truth and non-injury, are known as social virtues. Or it would be more accurate to say that all virtues of a personal nature can be grouped under purity, self-control, and detachment. And all virtues of a social nature can be grouped under truth and non-injury. Bodily cleanliness, clean thoughts, straightforwardness, frankness, innocence. Qualities like these come under purity. Control of body and mind, patience and forbearance, modesty, humility, self-effacement, and self-sacrifice. These come under self-control. Lastly, freedom from worldly ties, renunciation, that comes under detachment. So, the first 3 are of a personal nature. Truth includes honesty, sincerity, faithfulness, a spirit of inquiry and investigation, a sense of fairness. These qualities are grouped under truth. And finally, non-injury, the highest of virtues. That implies gentleness, courtesy, kindness, hospitality, and universal love. So now we have these great virtues classed under 2 broad groups, of a personal nature and of a social nature. In Vedic ethics, social virtues have a higher rank than individual virtues. For us, individual virtues may seem important, but to the Vedic rishis, social virtues were more important, because the worldview of the Vedic rishis was holistic. Their outlook on life was all-inclusive. To them, society consisted not only of human beings living here and now. Human society included also those who have gone before us and those who will come after us. All beings above us, that is to say, gods and ancestors, and all beings below us, subhuman creatures like birds and beasts. In their integral, holistic vision, the rishis felt that a human being has duties to all of them. They are all our relatives. That is the significance of the 5 great sacrifices every householder is obliged to offer every day. There we see what a grand, organic conception of society the Vedic rishis had. It's a conception that is not limited by space or time. nor is it confined to humankind. The Vedic rishis seem to enfold every living being in one all-enveloping embrace. That is how broad they were. Now, our soul work in the first stage of our ascent towards perfection, in this first stage of dharmic life, our task is the cultivation of all these primary and secondary virtues. We begin our life of dharma with external observances. But as we have heard again and again, these are only outer means of purification. We have to quickly pass from these externals to the real virtues. The virtues are the internal means by which the soul is purified. So they are more important, and we have to graduate to that level as quickly as possible. Advancing on the path of dharma doesn't mean we progress from one virtue to another successively, one after another, in the order in which they were mentioned. That is not what is meant. We don't systematically move from purity to self-control to detachment, truth, and non-violence. No. It is only for the sake of convenience that we divide and subdivide these virtues. For instance, we can't draw a hard and fast line between individual virtues and social virtues either. All virtue is really one. They're all really one. All of them together make up what we call a virtuous character. One important thing we need to always keep in mind: the significance of these virtues. That should always be understood with reference to the goal of a dharmic life. What is our goal, and what do these virtues mean to the realization of that goal? What is where lies their interrelationship? This is what we have to keep in mind. Virtue, morality, dharma, it is not an end in itself. Dharma is only a means to a much higher end, and that is spiritual perfection, which is our ultimate goal. I said our first task in this stage of our Godward ascent is the cultivation of all these main and subsidiary virtues. But it would be more proper to say that the formation of a virtuous character, rather than the cultivation of virtue, that is the aim. You may wonder, what is the difference between the formation of a virtuous character and the cultivation of virtues? Isn't it the same thing said in different ways? There is a difference, and I'll try to make it as clear as I can. Dharma means both virtue and duty. When the teachers of dharma say these are the samanya dharmas, these are the sadharana dharmas, universal virtues, what they actually mean is these are the fundamental virtues which it is everybody's duty to cultivate. These are the fundamental virtues, dharmas, which it is everybody's duty, kartavya, to cultivate. So dharma as cultivation of virtue is more or less in the nature of an obligation, a commandment coming from an external authority, at least in this stage. And why should I be dharmic? Because the books say so? Or just because it is good to be dharmic? This is how dharma is understood by the vast majority of people. Not everybody understands dharma with reference to the goal of life. Not everybody understands the relationship between the two. Moreover, the rationality of these virtues, why should we be virtuous? That depends upon circumstances. It is not always easy to determine at what point a virtue ceases to be a virtue. Just to give you a few examples, firmness is a virtue, courage, straightforwardness, non-violence, self-restraint, all of these are virtues. But firmness can easily become stubbornness, obstinacy. Courage can become foolhardiness or recklessness. Straightforwardness can pass into rudeness. Non-violence can become cowardice. And self-restraint, when taken to extremes, it can even end in self-annihilation. What I mean by saying all this is, the cultivation of virtues may mean just a mechanical obedience to moral commandments. Of course, this kind of strict obedience may be quite necessary in the beginning. That is why our lawgivers lay down the rules of dharma in such an apparently dogmatic manner. They appear to be strict and severe, uncompromising. But then we have to grow. We have to outgrow this stage. Some point soon, we have to learn to begin to act for ourselves. We have to decide for ourselves what is right, what is fair, what is virtuous in given circumstances. We should no longer feel unnecessarily hampered by rules and regulations that are laid down in the law books. What is our ultimate goal? The goal of human life is liberation of the soul through self-knowledge. Once that goal is firmly fixed in our mind, once that is never lost sight of, then all our thinking, feeling, willing, all our inner and outer responses become naturally attuned to that goal. That is when our life begins to be integrated. We begin to live one life. What happens at that stage is we begin to spontaneously think and act in ways that are helpful for the realization of that goal of Atmano Moksha, liberation of the soul. This is what is meant by acquiring a virtuous character, a natural and spontaneous tendency, a natural leaning towards dharma, a dharmic disposition of the mind. Then we become independent in our judgment. we become independent, and at the same time, there is much less chance of our going wrong. That is why Swami Vivekananda laid such great stress on the formation of a pure character. He did not uh, lay so much stress upon the cultivation of virtues as such, as he did on the formation of character. He said, whenever there is a conflict between the head and the heart, or in our context, whenever there is a conflict between the books and our heart, always follow the heart, provided there's one condition, provided the heart has been purified. Otherwise, there are all chances of our being misled. So this is what I meant. This is the difference between the cultivation of virtues and the formation of a virtuous character. Cultivation of virtues can become mechanical. But when a virtuous character is formed, then all my responses, my inner being itself becomes dharma. Now we have two standards of dharma. On the one hand, we have the do's and don'ts of the Shastras. And on the other, we have the example of a dharmatma, a person of dharmic character. On one side, we have the book and its teachings, and on the other, we have a person who embodies the spirit of what is taught in those books. Which of them should we follow? That is the question. It is not always easy to decide. A dharmatma is a virtuous soul, a virtuous person. A dharmatma is by all means a surer standard than a rule of dharma, for the simple reason that rules are open to interpretation. Rules can be interpreted the way we like, the way which is convenient to us. Rules and interpretations are seldom conclusive. But a dharmatma, a virtuous soul, is a living example. His actions and conduct carry a certain authenticity, a certain power of conviction, which is not to be found in books. In the Taittiriya Upanishad, there is a small section called Acharyopadesha. Acharya Upadesha, that is, instructions of the teacher. It contains some valuable advice that the teacher gives students who have completed their studies and are about to return home. Just before they leave the Gurukula, the Acharya gives them some parting advice on matters of dharma. Because when the student passes from studentship to the stage of a householder, he must be guided by dharma, not by what he has studied in the books. So how to decide in matters of doubt? The teacher says, now I quote the Upanishad, now, if there arises in your mind any doubt concerning any act, if there arises in your mind any doubt concerning conduct, you should conduct yourself in such matters as wise, holy people would conduct themselves. They are the ones to imitate. Wise, holy people who are competent to judge what is right and what is wrong. Wise, holy people who, of their own accord, naturally are devoted to virtue, who are devoted to good deeds. They're not urged, they're not compelled to perform good deeds, to be good and to do good by others. And wise, holy people who are not severe, this is the beautiful part. Wise, holy people who are not severe but are lovers of dharma. That means by instinct, they follow dharma naturally. They can't but follow, they can't but be dharma. And who is saying all this? The Shastra, Shruti, the book itself is saying all this. Should you have a doubt about an act or a line of conduct, in such a case, you should follow the wise and the holy. They are the ones that are competent to judge. They who are not compelled by injunctions and prohibitions, who are not dry, heartless followers of do's and don'ts, but who are lovers of dharma. And as if to add emphasis to this, the teacher says, this is the rule, this is the teaching, this is the secret wisdom of the Vedas. Secret wisdom means what you may not perceive at first glance. The wisdom of the Vedas, the secret of dharma is hard to understand. Book knowledge doesn't enable us to do that. We need somebody who exemplifies these things. Then we know what it is to be a dharmic, what it is to be a dharmatma, what it is to live a dharmic life. And the Upanishad continues, this is the command of God. This you should observe. This alone you should observe. It brings to mind what Sri Ramakrishna said about realized souls. He said, when you watch the actions of a realized soul and try to follow him, then you are safe. Then you are not in any danger, because an illumined soul is like an expert dancer. However the expert dancer may dance, it always looks harmonious, it is always beautiful. So Sri Ramakrishna said, an expert dancer rarely makes a mistake, rarely makes a false step. So if we follow these expert dancers, that is the wise and the holy, great souls, dharmatmas, then our life of dharma will be that much safer. In fact, according to Hinduism, we have 4 guides in matters of dharma. First is scripture, that we already know, the Vedas and the Smritis. The next is usage. Then the example of holy, wise people. And finally, our own conscience. 4 guides: scripture, usage, holy people, and conscience. The Shrutis and Smritis, the Vedas and Upanishads, and the law books. They are the sources of all our sacred laws. Next in succession, next in hierarchy are the customs and traditions that are started by those who understand these scriptures. That is to say, those who understand the spirit of these scriptures. Then comes the living examples of sages and saints. They are easy to follow. And finally, we have the approval of our own conscience. That is, the voice of God within. Our own inner self, Antaratma, has to be satisfied. So the Vedic ideal of spiritual perfection, that is the standard of reference that we always have to keep in sight. But what we have to follow in day-to-day practical life are the examples of sages and saints. These are our practical guides. This is just how Hinduism has succeeded in keeping its dharma alive. The moral and ethical codes are flexible. At the same time, their spirit is never compromised. That is why the Vedic Dharma, Sanatana Dharma, is still alive today. So, up until now, we have had a fairly long and detailed discussion of Dharma. Dharma as duty, Dharma as morality, righteousness, Dharma as virtue. All this, however, is one side of the picture. No picture of human existence will be complete. No picture of human life will be full without a consideration of the other side, the opposite of Dharma. I bring this matter up because we are studying Dharma in all its phases. And I feel we should not overlook Dharma because it is also part of, overlook Adharma because it is also part of the study of Dharma. So the opposite side is Adharma, immorality, unrighteousness, vice. What is together known as sin. Vedanta has a very different view of what is usually known as sin. We'll come to that shortly, but until then, we will keep this word, sin, in spite of, in spite of its terrible connotations. All these, the connotation, the burden of connotations it has acquired over time. So what is sin? And how many kinds of sin are there? But please remember, sin is just a word. I'm using this only for the sake of practicality. Just to keep things plain and simple. Just like virtues, there are innumerable sins. But they are generally classified in two ways. According to the first classification, they are grouped under sins of thought, sins of word, and sins of deed. So the first classification itself has three subdivisions: sins of thought, word, and deed. Long ago, you may remember, long ago, when we were studying the subject matter of the Smritis, we had occasion to refer to this sin in both its physical and mental aspects. You may remember that mental sin is punished as severely as physical sin. It only shows the refinement of those ancient Hindu lawgivers. It only shows their sensitivity to adharma, to sin. Even verbal sin is taken seriously, even when there is no evil intention behind it, even when it does not result in any cruel deed. Anyhow, that is the first classification, sins of thought, word, and deed. The other classification we may call the Bhagavad Gita classification. According to this classification, all sins are grouped under sensuality, hate, and greed. Just as we have all virtues grouped under 5 cardinal virtues, all sins are grouped under the 3 deadly sins. Krishna calls them deadly sins. They are Kama, Krodha, and Lobha. We read in the Bhagavad Gita, 3 are the gateways of this hell leading to the ruin of the soul. 3 are the gateways to this hell that result in the ruin of the soul. Lust, wrath, and greed. Excessive desire, excessive anger, excessive greed. Therefore, Krishna wants, therefore, let a person renounce these 3. Otherwise, they will ruin the soul. Ruin of the self means they make the soul unfit for any higher, nobler endeavor. We become unfit for spiritual life. Krishna also mentions the great result that follows from their renunciation. He says, the person who has escaped these 3 gates of darkness, the person who has escaped these 3 gates of darkness will be able to practice what is good and thus attains the supreme goal. So these 2 pieces of advice that Krishna gives in the 3rd chapter, we have to read side by side. But all these divisions are rather artificial. Last week we heard that all virtues are only different forms of the one supreme virtue. They are all different forms of truth. In the same way, there is only one great sin which takes all these numberless forms. And that is selfishness. It is desire that is self-centered. This is how Krishna defines them in the Bhagavad Gita. What, after all, is sin? If we try to understand it clearly, it is simply one's opposition to God. Or in Vedantic terms, it is the opposition of the flesh to the spirit. A sinner is one who is out of harmony with society to which one belongs, and also out of harmony with the world of spirit, of which one is part. So this disharmony between the individual and the whole, in essence, this is what sin is. A sinner is one who breaks the laws of both the human world and the spiritual world. This is the right way of understanding the concept of sin. The dharma that I violate here, the dharma that I violate is only the human counterpart, the human equivalent of the universal dharma. It is only the human counterpart of rita, the rhythm or order of the universe. In my ajnana, in my spiritual blindness, I think I can be independent of the rules that govern the universe. If I take it too far, then I become like a limb that refuses to function with the rest of the body. An individual member of the body that tries to set up some local action. What is the result? The result is inflammation, pain, disease. When I do something that is morally and ethically wrong, first of all, before harming others, first of all, I sin against myself. Only later do I become a deceased member of society. I become a rebel against God. I set my will against God's will. But let's remember, we are Vedantins. Both are in us. Flesh and spirit, both are in me, because I, as a human being, am a combination. In my present condition, I am a combination of both spirit and flesh. Spirit is my higher nature, that is my true nature. Flesh is my lower nature with which I now identify myself. I can rise and unfold my higher nature through jnana, through spiritual knowledge, or I can sink. I can sink and bury myself in the pit of my lower nature through the opposite of jnana, kama, selfish desire. I can do either. But when I choose the easier option, when I choose the pleasant over the good, and when I exceed certain limits, then natural justice, that will come into play. That is called divine retribution. That will remove me like a cancerous organ. That is what will happen to me if I persist with adharma. In the Gita, we find Arjuna asking Krishna for a clear statement about the source of this evil. Under what compulsion does a person commit sin? In spite of themselves, as if driven by force. A human being is called a human being because he is supposed to be able to distinguish between good and evil. It is this viveka that makes a human being a human being. We all want to be good. We all want to do good. But sometimes we end up doing just the reverse, against our own wishes, as though we were compelled by an outside force. How does this happen? The Lord says, it is desire, it is wrath, which springs from rajas, passion. Know this to be your enemy here, says Krishna. Know this to be your enemy here. This all-devouring monster, it'll before harming others, it will eat up whatever good that is left in you. This all-devouring monster is the cause of all sin. Krishna and Buddha have both clearly said that it is desire, it is craving alone that is the cause of all evil in this world. We commit sin only because of desire. But then, are all desires our enemies? Naturally not, because desire is the one and only motive force that we have. Desire is the only motive behind all our thoughts and actions. We have no other driving force except desire. That is why Krishna says, self-centered desire, selfish desire, that is sinful. In another place, Krishna says, Dharma viruddho bhuteshu kamosmi bharatarshava. I am the desire in all beings. I am the desire in all beings that is not contrary to dharma. Desire becomes bad only when the intention is unlawful, illicit gratification of the lower self. When I am self-centered, what I do is raise walls between me and my fellow beings. My selfishness comes into conflict with the law of love, the universal law of love. And this retards my spiritual unfoldment. Because it, as Swamiji says, when you do something immoral, what you are really doing is drawing one more wheel of ignorance upon yourself. That is what you are doing. And what we call sin is only this, ignorance. We do this in our spiritual ignorance, in our blindness. That amounts to saying that selfishness is sin. If that is true, if selfishness is sin, won't that make all of us sinners? The plain answer is yes. All of us are sinners in a way. But as I said just a while ago, Vedanta has a very different view of what is usually known as sin. The word sin has deeply degrading connotations. Neither Sri Ramakrishna nor Swami Vivekananda liked us to use that word. Swami Vivekananda famously said, it is sin to call a human being a sinner, and worse, to call them born sinners. Because it is not true, that is not the fact. Human beings are not sinners, nor is human life evil, or the world always antagonistic to God. What Vedanta says is, you are not sinners, not only that, you are the children of immortal bliss, you are the children of immortality. Only you have forgotten this fact now. This is the fact, but you have forgotten it. And this spiritual forgetfulness, this self-forgetfulness is obscuring your spiritual vision. And so you have a false self-image of yourself. That is why I think of myself as this little body. But Vedanta believes in a God who is immanent in creation. It is God who has become everything. And Vedanta promises the ultimate salvation of all living beings. It does not believe that evil is ultimately real. It does not believe in the idea of eternal punishment because they are wrong. They are illogical. Everywhere in its teachings, Vedanta claims to show the way to permanent happiness. According to it, we human beings are immortal souls. So, being immortal, we cannot be satisfied with mortal things. So, Vedanta teaches us not to put our faith, not to put too much love in the passing pleasures of this world. It exhorts us to find the joys of the spirit. Vivekananda says in one of his lectures on religion, there can be no beginning of spiritual life unless we are dissatisfied with our present condition. Dissatisfaction with this life as it is being lived now, that is the starting point of a better future life. So, if we don't try to break out of our present limitations, if we make no attempt to rise above our narrow views of ourselves and others, if we don't give up selfishness, we have no hope of progress. We all start from a self-centered life. But when our conception of self gradually expands to include family, community, country, and so on, we grow less and less selfish. That is to say, less and less sinful. As we learn to love, as we learn to work for larger units selflessly, our desires purify themselves. They fall in harmony with God's will. All progress of Dharma, all progress in Dharma lies here in this, harmonizing self-will with the will that governs the cosmos. This is how to get rid of the sin of selfishness. We can get rid of our sins most easily and naturally by expanding our souls. Our character becomes naturally dharmic just by the practice of selflessness. We heard at the beginning of our class today that our first and foremost task now is the formation of a virtuous character. That is to say, to develop a natural and spontaneous tendency or a leaning towards dharma, to develop a virtuous temperament of the mind. The easiest way of accomplishing this task is just by being selfless. Every selfless act that we do increases our spiritual power, and this spiritual power helps us rise above sin. Every selfless act, what is a selfless act? It is nothing but the result. It is nothing but the expression of our expanding love. It all adds to the strength of the soul. Swami Vivekananda said, truth, purity, and unselfishness. Truth, purity, and unselfishness. There is no power below or above the sun that can crush the person who has these. This is what Swamiji said. So, a selfless person is the freest and the strongest person. But we all have our defects, our drawbacks, weaknesses, and we need to address them. It doesn't help to avoid facing our faults of character, to avoid the topic of sin altogether. Each such fault is like a leak in a boat. We need to stop every leak. There are leaks, we do have leaks, and we need to stop every leak if we want to save the boat from sinking. We need to be aware that all these little sins, small and big, all these sins are only outer symptoms of a deeper disease of the soul. What we call sin is not the disease. It is only the symptom, and the disease of the soul is selfishness. This both Buddha and Vivekananda have identified. Selfishness is the disease of the soul. Some people believe if they perform certain penances, if they undergo certain purificatory rites that are found in the books, they can escape the results of their wrongdoings. If only dharma were so easy. At best, these rites, these ceremonies may ease their guilty consciences, but no more. Sri Ramakrishna used to say, sins perch on the trees along the bank of the Ganges. No sooner does the man come back from the holy waters than the old sins jump on his shoulders again. The same old sins take possession of him again. So the man is hardly out of the water before the old sins fall upon him again. Then, what is the use of all these acts of atonement we read about? All these prayaschittas that we find in the Shastras? The answer is, they're only meant for those who have definitely turned away from their evil ways. Definitely turned away. Long ago, we heard a line from the Kathopanishad. It said, this self is not to be realized by one who has not turned away from evil. Na virato duscharitat. So, prayaschittas, acts of atonement, are meant for those who have definitely turned away. Duscharitat virataha. They are only effective when there is a definite change of heart. Sri Ramakrishna says, one will be freed of one's sins on 3 conditions. One will be definitely freed of sins if one confesses them in public, prays to God for forgiveness with tears of repentance in one's eyes, and promises not to repeat them. It is all very simple, but almost impossible to do. So all these penances, all these purificatory rites only show that the person apologizes for, he repents his wrongdoings. That the person is sincere about retracing his false steps. They only show that the person's determination to change his ways. No teacher of Dharma has ever said that sin can be easily washed away merely by distributing gifts or fasting or observing vigils. First of all, there has to be a change of heart. All the rest only confirm that inner change, the soul's purification. But the purification itself must come from within. Nobody can be saved from outside. It is just like the health of the body. The health of the soul also has to come from within. No amount of medication will help me. No amount of food supplements can strengthen me if I keep disobeying the laws of health. Supplements are supplements. They can never be substitutes. They can never be replacements. It is as simple as that. Now we have both sides of the picture. I said, no picture of human existence. I mean, no picture of our moral struggle is complete without a consideration of both dharma and adharma, virtue and sin. Our journey towards dharma, our journey towards perfection along the path of dharma will be much safer if we are aware of the dangers and pitfalls on the way. It is futile to close our eyes to that. This is the only reason why teachers and their books deal with the subject of sin in such an open, detailed manner. They don't avoid addressing these things. These are the uncomfortable realities. They are the unpleasant realities of actual dharmic life. It is no use to sweep the dirt under the carpet and pretend everything is fine. The teachers don't do it because they wish us well. They wish for our welfare. Sometimes they are like physicians who prescribe bitter medicine. You can take it or leave it. They speak frankly about their diagnosis, but they don't impose their prescriptions on us. The choice is ours. The choice is ours, but the responsibility is also ours. Thank you all.